When people picture a narcissist, they picture someone specific. Loud. Boastful. The center of every room, talking over everyone, clearly, obviously, in love with themselves. That image is common sense. It's also incomplete in a way that leaves an entire category of harmful relationships completely unrecognized. Clinical research has identified a second, distinct type of narcissism, one that looks almost nothing like the stereotype. It presents as shy, self-deprecating, sensitive, even humble. And because it doesn't match what anyone was warned about, it is, according to the people who study it, one of the hardest forms of narcissistic behavior to recognize from the inside of a relationship. Here's what actually distinguishes it. Reason 1. Psychological research identified two separate phases of narcissism decades ago, and most people have only ever heard about one. In a foundational 1991 study, psychologist Paul Wink analyzed personality data and identified two statistically distinct clusters of narcissistic traits. The first, grandiose narcissism, matches the stereotype, confidence, dominance, overt self-importance. The second, which Wink termed vulnerable, and which is now widely referred to as covert narcissism, shares the same core traits underneath: a deep need for validation, low empathy for others' inner experience, and a fragile, inflated sense of self-importance. But it expresses those traits through anxiety, hypersensitivity, and a persistent sense of being wronged, rather than through visible confidence. Same underlying structure. Almost opposite presentation. Which means most of the warning signs people learn to watch for simply don't apply. Reason 2. The covert narcissist doesn't take center stage. They position themselves as the one who's constantly wronged. Where grandiose narcissism demands admiration directly, covert narcissism secures attention and control through a persistent victim narrative, being chronically misunderstood, overlooked, treated unfairly by nearly everyone in their life. This narrative accomplishes something specific: it makes them extremely difficult to confront. Raise a concern about their behavior, and the conversation reliably becomes about how hurt they are that you would say such a thing. The conflict that started about their actions ends with you comforting them. Clinicians who study narcissistic presentations describe this as one of the primary mechanisms of covert narcissism: not overpowering people, but redirecting every interaction back to their own emotional experience until challenging them starts to feel cruel. Reason 3. Where grandiose narcissism explodes, covert narcissism withdraws, and makes you respond to the withdrawal. Instead of visible anger, covert narcissism tends to express itself through sulking, silent treatment, backhanded compliments, and a quiet, persistent air of disappointment that never fully explains itself. You already know, from how the nervous system processes exclusion, exactly how powerful that kind of silence is. Now imagine it deployed not occasionally, but as the default response to nearly any moment where they don't receive the attention or validation they were seeking. The aggression is real. It's simply routed through withdrawal instead of confrontation, which means it rarely looks like aggression to anyone watching from outside the relationship, including, for a long time, to you. Reason 4. Underneath the humility is something clinicians describe as fragile grandiosity, and it explains the disproportionate reaction to even small feedback. Contemporary narcissism researcher Elsa Roningstam, who has spent decades studying narcissistic personality patterns clinically, describes covert narcissism as built around an unstable, easily threatened sense of self-worth, one that requires constant, if quiet, confirmation of its own importance. This is why even mild, well-intentioned feedback can trigger a reaction wildly out of proportion to what was actually said. A gentle suggestion at work. A small request for change in a relationship. The response isn't proportional discussion, it's wounded withdrawal, or a redirection back to how unfairly they're being treated. The self-deprecation that makes them seem humble and the intensity of their reaction to criticism are not contradictions. Roningstam's research frames them as two expressions of the exact same fragile foundation. Reason 5. The mismatch with the stereotype is precisely what makes this pattern so hard to leave. If someone is loud, entitled, and obviously self-important, the people around them can usually name what they're seeing. Covert narcissism doesn't offer that clarity. The person seems fragile, self-critical, even frequently apologetic in a general, diffuse way that never quite resolves into real accountability. This creates a specific and disorienting form of self-doubt. How could someone this humble, this quietly wounded, be the same category of harmful as the narcissists everyone warns you about? That question alone is often enough to keep people second-guessing their own perception for years, because the behavior in front of them doesn't match the label they've been taught to look for. Reason 6. They can perform empathy convincingly, which makes the pattern even harder to trust your instincts about. Unlike a purely cold or detached presentation, covert narcissism frequently includes brief, genuine-seeming moments of warmth, insight, or emotional attunement. These moments are real experiences for the person receiving them, which is exactly what makes the overall pattern so confusing. The consistency is what reveals it, not any single interaction. The warmth reliably surfaces when it serves to repair a rupture or maintain the relationship, and reliably evaporates the moment it would require sustained attention to someone else's needs over their own. Clinicians point to this specific inconsistency, not any one bad moment, as the clearest marker of the underlying pattern. Here is what matters most from all of this. If you have spent time in a relationship with someone who seems too fragile, too self-critical, too quietly wounded to possibly be causing you harm, and you have still walked away from every interaction feeling smaller, more responsible, more at fault than the situation seems to warrant, trust that pattern over the label you were taught to look for. Narcissism was never defined by volume. It was defined, in the clinical research from the very beginning, by an underlying structure, low empathy for your inner experience, a fragile sense of self that requires constant management, and a persistent redirection of attention back to their own needs. That structure can be loud. It can also be quiet, humble, and endlessly apologetic while still operating by exactly the same rules. The most reliable way to see it clearly is not to analyze any single conversation. It's to step back and look at the pattern across many of them, and to trust what you consistently feel afterward over what you were told you should be feeling in the moment.